What's a touch to gimpy gimpy fraught with? How did the wish to restore agriculture turn into a real catastrophe? What's Dura dangerous for? How does the mechanism of the Venus flytrap work? Watch this episode. Today, you'll see the most dangerous plants in the world. Stinky corpse lily. This is the name of one of the most spectacular, well-known parasitic plants. It spends most of its life in the tissues of its host plant. But let's talk about that a little later. For now, I'll tell you why Rafflesia, or stinky corpse lily, is even called that. This plant was discovered in the rainforests of the southwestern part of the island of Sumatra. An honorary member of the expedition, Dr. Joseph Arnold, found an amazingly huge bright flower that seemed to grow right out of the ground and for some reason smelled like rotten meat. The locals, as it later turned out, had known about it for a long time. However, they had no intention of having anything to do with the flower. A coincidence or not, but the fears were confirmed. Dr. Arnold died from fever soon, as well as his 4 relatives, one after another. Well, the parasite was named in honor of the discoverers, Thomas Stamford Raffles, who led the expedition, and Joseph Arnold, who helped him. People who dared to come into contact with this plant went to the other world, whereas the motley monster continues to live happily ever after. It parasitizes the stems and roots of plants, greedily stealing their nutrients. And the stinky corpse lily was so brazen that it doesn't even grow any stems or leaves. It simply tastes all that's given by the vines where it grows. The seed, once on the necessary plant, germinates and penetrates by roots inside the tissue of the host plant. Then the entire outer part of the seedling dies off. There, the flower is actively growing, gaining strength, and in 3 years a huge bud appears outside. It will open in 6 months. And believe me, it's literally impossible to miss this moment. The opened miracle of the world will exude an unbearable smell of rot, and along with an interesting appearance, will attract insects one after another. In the center of the flower, there's a disc with creepy growths and pollen on them. If the Rafflesia is pollinated in time, it will bear berry-like fruit. Well, can't the fruit at least be tasty and healthy? Well, no. It's such a cheeky plant that it doesn't even make its fruit tasty. Inside the berry, you'll find 100,000 seeds embedded in a viscous and sticky substance. When some animal accidentally crushes such a berry, the seeds will stick to its feet and spread to another place. History will repeat itself, a new flower will grow, it'll be pollinated, fruit will appear, and everything will go around in a circle. Hoping that the stinky corpse lily is not as useless as it seems at first glance, people have tried to use it in medicine, but this has led to absolutely nothing. Gimpy Gimpy. The name of our next guest sounds much more positive. It seems that this plant is going to be beautiful and useful, albeit a little dangerous. How can I put it? Gimpy Gimpy does sound more positive, but that's where its advantages in relation to Rafflesia end. Moreover, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy to encounter a stinging tree, as our guest is otherwise known. This large shrub grows in and near tropical forests. It's usually at least 10 feet tall, but sometimes grows to 30 feet. The leaves of the Gimpy Gimpy are large, 4 to 8 inches long each. They're characterized by serrated edges, a pointed tip, and a heart-shaped base. Looking at them for the first time, no adequate person will want to try his luck and touch, and one will be absolutely right. There are legends about the terrible conditions of people who were not lucky enough to touch this shrub. Composition of the Gimpy Gimpy toxin still worries many scientists. The Australian Department of Defense, for some time, even considered the proposal to use the poison of this plant as a biological weapon. But if you create something like this, first you need to have an antidote, a cure for all those who will be affected by this toxin. And that's where the first problems began. The fact is that scientists couldn't figure out the formula for the plant toxin. The Gimpy Gimpy contained the same substances as nettles, but the difference in stinging effect was enormous. In the case of our poisonous shrub, red spots appear on the skin, merging into a solid tumor. However, the unpleasant appearance is the least that should worry a person. Those who have been stung describe the pain as a combination of an intense chemical burn and an electric shock. The plant's fine hairs, containing a mixture of toxins, dig into the skin and break off, staying there for a long time. I don't know how true this is. However, it's said that if a person is not treated promptly, he can be in pain for months. The body temperature rises, joints begin to break down, and lymph nodes also become inflamed, all because of touching a small leaf. Lo and behold. Tree nettle. This is the name of the species of nettle endemic to New Zealand that we're going to talk about. The thing is similar in its properties to the gimpy, but looks in a different way. The tree nettle has a trunk and large stinging prickles. This horror grows up to 16 feet in height. The slightest touch is said to cause a painful burn. The nettle tree has killed at least one person, as well as several dogs and horses. At the same time, the chemical composition of the nettle tree is virtually no different from the usual nettle and contains histamine and formic acid. There's one big but. This plant contains these substances in a prohibitive amount. Histamine, for example, is the compound responsible for itching. It's when histamines enter the body that we get blisters. Second substance, the formic acid, is a colorless liquid with a specific odor causing irritation. When it comes into contact with the skin, a person feels pain. Although it's believed that in small amounts this acid, on the contrary, will provide better blood circulation and help reduce blood clots, instead of shock or cramps. Who cares about the minuscule doses? Tree nettle, as I said, has horsey proportions, so it's best not to mess with this herb. By the way, I said don't mess with it, and for several reasons I immediately thought of this amazing story of Sosnowski's hogweed. Haven't you ever heard of it? I'll tell you about it. In the USSR, they loved large-scale experiments to transform and improve the environment, as well as its adaptation to the needs of the economy. But as you've probably already guessed, not all such tests end successfully. The story of the hogweed is among the failures. At that time, the USSR had difficult years, and agriculture needed to be restored as soon as possible. Unpretentious and high-yielding fodder for livestock was required. In the 1940s, the Soviet leadership learned that North America already had the plant needed for livestock: juicy, high-calorie, low-maintenance, and growing several feet in height. It's just some kind of gold mine with an urgent need to find an analog. Breeders have conducted research and determined that the most suitable candidate for this purpose in their region would be the hogweed. In general, there are dozens of species of this plant. However, specialists from the USSR liked one that would later be called Sosnowski's hogweed. This species grew in the mountains of the Caucasus and in Turkey. Experiments began, the goal of which was very clear: to form a separate crop on the basis of hogweed to correct the situation in agriculture. But few could have thought that something terrible would come out of an ordinary experiment with a peaceful message. At first, everything went well. People were excited and they sowed many fields with this plant. Many began to wait and hope that animals would be interested in this crop, whereas the cattle ate it reluctantly. In addition, the animals fed with hogweed did not gain weight well. Quality of their meat deteriorated and the milk became bitter. In a nutshell, the experiment was a failure. What of that? Should we just kill this plant and get rid of all the soil? This sounds optimistic, except that Sosnowski's hogweed was obviously not ready for such outcomes. It turned out that its roots went underground up to 6.5 feet. At the same time, the parasite itself grows up to 16 feet in height. But that wasn't the worst of it. During the harvest, an unpleasant fact became clear. The hogweed burned the skin when touched. Workers who were harvesting this plant received serious and long-lasting burns. For some people, they turned out to be even fatal. Because of this factor, many people stopped fighting against it and gave up. The hogweed itself felt fine and effectively multiplied, taking over new territories. Plain soils were to its liking because there were no competing plants nearby. Today, the fight against this plant is still going on, as it can take at least 2 years to defeat it in just one particular field. It's so hardy and strong. Fortunately, the next plant is not so big and scary anymore, although it's still dangerous. It's called dodder, and it's basically a parasite without leaves or roots. The rogue grew in the tropics of America and Africa and quickly migrated to the north and south. And while this migration took place, it still managed to split into 100 new species. And it's said that its development continues, and today science knows about more than 200 different species of dodders. It doesn't look scary at all, it rather resembles a tangled thin cord. And the so-called wires, in our case, can be of completely different colors, from red to green. On this very wire, flowers are located that are of a similar color to the stem. Its parasitism occurs in the following way. As I've already said, the twig has no root, so it's attached not to the soil like the others, but directly to some green fellow. The attachment takes place due to suction cups that soften the surface of its target. As soon as the docking is considered complete, the parasite begins to suck all the moisture and nutrients from the plant. The latter, that was not lucky enough to become a donor for the parasite, begins to weaken. Metabolism's disturbed, it becomes ill. In general, the host plant gradually and systematically dies. Moreover, literally everyone is subject to such an attack. I'm sure if trees had legs, they would immediately run away from the field inhabited by this parasite. In addition, it's very difficult to prevent the emergence of dodders. Its seeds appear instantly. As soon as the graders get a little giddy and do not clean the grain properly, it can be spread by animals and vehicles, and its seeds are easily spread through the air and even float on water in response to falling objects that have no nutritional value. We're talking about other leaves, some debris, or the same raindrops. When two hairs are irritated, a so-called action potential is generated and transmitted from one cell to the other. It's this that stimulates specific cells to tense up, causing the trap to close. And when the number of affected hair reaches 5, the plant receives a signal that it's time to release the secretion and ferment the enemy. Such complete digestion takes about 10 days on average. When the process is complete, the trap will open as wide as it can and drop the remains of the insect away. A few days will pass, and the trap will return to its original position, again waiting for the enemy. Cura. Now we're going to talk about an amazing plant from North and South America, aka the dynamite tree. I proposed not to spend time on the introductory part and get down to business. The trunk of this tree is covered with small thorns. They protect it from various unwanted guests. The fruit, the main feature of the plant, resembles a pumpkin, only a more compact one. This box with lobes only looks cute and safe. In fact, when it reaches maturity, it opens with an explosion and throws out seeds at a speed of up to 230 feet per second. The juice of the cura causes severe skin irritation, burning sensation in contact with the eyes, and temporary blindness is possible. Even smoke or sawdust from this plant can cause irritation. An accidental consumption of the fruit will easily lead to convulsions, hallucinations, and even death. Curiously, despite the toxicity of the plant, it's completely harmless to birds. And the Indians who learned about the properties of this tree before us began to collect its fruits and smear them with the juice of arrows, not to attack strangers but to hunt fish. As scientists have found out, the toxin contained in this dynamite tree is particularly toxic to fish and other animals. That's about it. Write in the comments what plant seemed the most dangerous to you. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel.